For those of you who are not familiar with ClientSuccess, or you're just getting familiar with ClientSuccess, we are a customer success management platform and more. Historically, we have been a solo platform, really helping customers, what we said, manage from new to renew, so that entire post-initial sales life cycle. But we are so much more than that. Over the past several months, if you've been following our journey, we've had a series of acquisitions, including one of my personal favorites, Baton. If you're not familiar with Baton, it is an onboarding solution, but so much more. I do encourage you, if you are somebody who leads onboarding, whether it's in your customer success function, you're part of an implementation team, take a peek at it. You will not be disappointed. We have been moving folks over to our solution for the past several months now, and the feedback is fantastic. So if you're interested in learning more about Baton, you can go ahead and scan that QR code. It will bring you to some more information and get a demo scheduled. So if you are interested, I definitely recommend you go check it out.
We'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Dave Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of ClientSuccess, and I am thrilled to welcome one of my good friends from so many years back, Jared Cook, with us today, who is the founder of Crush Churn Consulting. Jared, how are you doing?
Hey, great. And thanks so much, Dave. Appreciate you having me on the webinar today.
Oh, I'm so stoked. We're both coming in from Utah. It is a beautiful spring day here in Utah. The sun is out, the flowers are blooming. I'm really excited about this topic, renewal forecasting. And this is one of the hardest things to master as customer success or renewals teams. So I'm really excited about this topic. Jared, maybe let's start by sharing a little bit about your background, and it was some that we shared together, but tell us about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, happy to. And I'm going to just share out my screen as we go through this. But the short story is I've got 25 years of experience. And tell me, Dave, if that's coming through all
Yep.
right. Screen
It's
share.
great.
Okay. 25 years of experience. I've been super fortunate. Worked at companies like Adobe, and then at Domo, and more recently at a learning management platform called Docebo. And my background's always been in tech. Got a soft spot for SaaS, and all things customers, really what my focus has been. It's like, how do you actually deliver value to a customer? And so that's what I'm focused on. I've started my own consulting business at this point to help other companies reduce customer churn and deliver results.
That's great. So fun fact for everybody, Jared and I first met working together at a company called Omniture. If anybody on here knows Omniture besides Christy Felcher-Rousseau, put it in the chat, because Omniture is a leading web analytics company that was acquired by Adobe. Jared and I worked together there, taking care of the customers around the globe. And Jared has always been a very customer-centric, strategic thought leader around customers. So we're excited to have you on, Jared. Jared, why this topic? Why did this is, I'm excited about it, but what drew you to this topic?
This is something, as I consult with companies, like, this is probably the number one thing that they ask about. It's like, how do I get confident in forecasting for renewals? Because, businesses live or die on whether their customers renew. We call it an ARR business, but if that revenue doesn't recur, that's a big problem for businesses. And so trying to get accurate, predictable forecasting is probably the number one thing that I hear.
That's great. Well, let's jump in. I'll turn it over to you. I'll be here to monitor the chat. Again, if you have questions for Jared throughout, we encourage you to drop those in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that we surface those at the end of the webinar, and to make sure that all of your questions are addressed.
Cool. Awesome. Well, if you've joined the webinar, I know that you care about forecasting and that renewals are important to you. And so what I'll just say is, if you go and apply the things that you're going to hear today, I promise you're going to get more predictable, more accurate in your forecasts. You're going to gain better trust from leadership, that they'll know that the churn is being managed. You get better alignment and collaboration across all the teams, because you'll see here in a minute that renewals is not the job of just one team, and that results really matter. That's what you'll be able to see by the end of today. So we already talked a little bit about my background, so I won't touch more on that. I will just say some of the things that I love the most: anything outside, hiking, biking, boating, fishing, scuba diving, you name it, anything outdoors. I love good food, especially if it's been smoked on a Traeger. And I love family. I've got 2 kids, teenagers. They keep us running, and my wife and I have been married for 25 years. We're, as Dave mentioned, we're in Utah. So let's jump into it. Look, predicting the weather can be hard and sometimes wrong. This is kind of funny. If you go back into history and you look at how did people used to predict the weather, this will probably make you laugh. Out in France, they had frogs as weathermen. Like literally, what they would do is they put a frog inside of a jar with a little ladder in it. And if the frog climbed out of the ladder, it meant there'd be good weather. Now, and if you're wondering, yes, I did use AI to generate that image, which is why the ladder's on the outside of the jar and is missing a couple of rungs. But still, the in Great Britain or in the United Kingdom, they would look at their bread, and if it turned moldy, it meant that rain was coming. Okay. And over in Italy, this is my favorite. In Italy at night, they'd start listening to the chickens, and the louder the chickens got, it meant that there'd be a thunderstorm. So, predicting the weather, it can be hard, and oftentimes in the past, it was very wrong. The good news is that predicting customer churn, while it can also be hard, it doesn't have to be wrong. And so if you step back and you ask yourself, what accurately predicts whether or not a customer is going to stay with you or not, it really comes down to a handful of signals. And many of these you probably are aware of, but are they using your product? Do they log in? That's probably the number one predictor, by the way, and probably one of the hardest things for many companies to actually get real-time data on. The second is, are they paying you? Do they consistently meet their financial obligations? Customer engagement signals. This means, are they dodging you? When you try to reach out for a business review, do you get a response? When you email them, do they respond back? Your account behavior sentiment. This is more of a pulse from your account teams of, is the customer happy or not? There's automated ways. NPS and CSAT are great ways to look at sentiment, but often the account manager or CSM have a direct pulse on that. Technical operations, have they integrated your system into other tools and into their processes? And great tools like ClientSuccess take all of this data, they merge it into one and provide a really great composite health score. So, that's something that I would just look at. If you're missing any of these gaps, this is a call to action, because if you don't have all of these in place, it's just like the weather. You're trying to use frogs to predict what's going to happen. So how do you know whether or not you're in an organization where your forecasting might need an upgrade? Here's the top 5 that I hear. All right. So when asked who owns customer renewals, you find yourself kind of dodging or giving a vague answer. Okay. Number 4, when asked why a customer churned, there's a bunch of this going on. Finger pointing. Number 3, when the CFO asks you to forecast the next couple of quarters, you may give a broad range, but deep down, let's be honest, you're worried. You're worried that the number you're giving isn't actually accurate. Number 2, when you ask a CSM why a specific customer churned, you get a loosey-goosey answer. Right? They don't really know. And number 1, when asked for a report on churn forecast, let's be honest, panic, and then a bunch of manual process kicks off to try to figure it out. So if any of these resonate with you, I'm curious, if you want to drop into the chat or into the comments, like what are other warning signs that you see? I'd love to hear about it.
Jared, I will say I've seen all of these over the years, both individually and from various team members and leaders over many years.
Yeah. And, the good news is it doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. So what we're going to spend the rest of the time on is how do you actually master customer forecasting like a boss? And so I'm going to give you 5 tips, 5 concrete things that you can go start doing today that will increase the forecasting accuracy, predictability, collaboration across teams, and ultimately put you in a place where you can deliver results. So here's number 1. I had a boss. This is probably his favorite quote. If everyone owns it, no one owns it. And I consulted with a company. They're about a $50 million business. They were growing fast, getting ready for IPO. And it was interesting because when I went in, I started to ask, okay, well, tell me kind of who owns your customer renewal? And as you listen to that question, go ask people in your organization this, by the way. When you listen to the answers, it will tell you whether you're in an organization where there's clarity or ambiguity. This is what I heard. It really depended. If there was an upsell in swing, well, the AE or the account manager owned it. And if it was a really small customer and there was no CSM assigned, well, support owned it. And if they were still in onboarding, the onboarding teams owned it. And if none of that was true, well, then the CSM owned it, right? That's what I heard. The reality is that renewals is a team sport. This is not something that can be done by a single team, but that doesn't mean that there can't be a single owner who takes responsibility for renewals. And that's what I'm advocating here. So my call to action would be, if you're a leader in an organization where ownership is unclear, today's the day. Stand up and own it. Take ownership and then help remove ambiguity from the organization. Now, if you're on this call and listening thinking, yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity, but I'm not the leader, I can't stand up and own it, you can still be a leader. You be the leader in helping your leader own it and remove ambiguity, because until there's clarity, there's always going to be confusion. All right. So that's number one. Go get
Jared, I've got a question for you.
Go ahead.
Do you, this can be kind of a controversial topic, but do you have a suggestion of who should own it? What would be your answer if somebody says, well, who should own it? Should it be CSM? Should it be a renewals specialist? Should it be AE? Any feedback that you would have in that regard?
Yeah, it really depends on the maturity of the organization. Typically, what I see, if you're kind of small and growing, the delineation between an account manager and a CSM and maybe an onboarding person, the lines are pretty gray. And you may have one person who's doing all those things, frankly.
Okay.
Right? As you become a more mature organization, you're going to have better delineation where you have individuals focused on expansion and upsell in the base, individuals focused on renewal, individuals focused on onboarding. So regardless of whether you're small, medium, or large, though, having clarity over the role that owns it is essential. And we'll get to another way that you can tell very quickly within your organization whether there's clarity or ambiguity. So we'll get to that here in a couple of points.
Great.
Yeah, great question, Dave. Okay, number 2, build a muscle of consistent forecast calls. If you were to be a fly on the wall in a sales forecast, I'm talking about like new logo sales, here's probably what you'd see. You're going to see a cascading focus or process, rather, that goes from the individual sales rep to their manager to the VP, running up to the CEO and CFO. And it's on a cadence. Every week or every other week, that's being run. You'll see that forecasts every deal, bottoms up. You'll see that calls are fact-based. They're number-driven and action-oriented. That's what you'd see if you stepped into a sales forecast. So what I'm inviting my customers to do is to adopt this same mindset in terms of renewals. So I put together a sample template here of what that forecast process might look like. So say on a Monday, all your CSMs, if the CSM owns it, they're prepping all the data, they're updating their CRM or their ClientSuccess tool with all the notes. On Tuesday, they're sitting down, quick call, reporting that forecast to their manager. On Wednesday, that rolls up to the VP. On Thursday, rolls up to the CEO, to CFO. And then on Friday, we reset and get ready for the next week. So having a consistent cadence, now this might be run every week. It might be every other week. I would suggest that as you get started, more frequent is better. And then you can dial back the frequency as the teams get into a rhythm. But the most important thing is getting those people on a call to own, what they own. So start now. I know you may be thinking, yeah, but I don't have the data, or I don't have, full buy-in across the organization. Look, you could wait 3 months from now and it's still going to be messy. So I recommend move quick, learn fast. Keep the attendees to a minimum. They should only be the required people, and be careful to not overburden people. Organizations can get forecast fatigue. If you've got the same person joining multiple calls, it can feel like redundancy. And then lastly, you'll see on the right, just create a script so that the people know, those that are forecasting know exactly what you're looking for. So I want you to come onto the call. The first thing you're going to show me within your segment of customers, within your geographical region, is give me for the current month the dollars that were up for renewal, the forecast renewal percent, the dollars that have been closed, and down the list there. You can read that. But that way, there's consistency from one forecaster to another, and it creates a very efficient call to the end that you can then listen as the person consuming to know exactly what questions to ask. So that's number two. Go build a muscle of forecasting within your organization. Number three, touched on this just a second ago, but every deal bottoms up. There's a lot of ways to do this. So on the left side of the screen would be a manual approach, but it works. You could have a Google sheet, as an Excel spreadsheet, it doesn't really matter. But what you see across the columns here, if you look in, is that this is happening every single week. And then down the left side in this column B are all your forecast categories. So for every dollar is accounted for. Anything that's up for renewal, how does that break down into these different categories? And what we're looking for is this here on row 11 for January would be the percent of call to total up for renewal. That just tells me, okay, what do we think the renewal revenue retention will be for that given period? And this percent to call change is great. Just saying, hey, last week you said that it was going to be 65%, or 68%. Now this week it's 69%. Okay, great. That was a 0.997% improvement. So this is a manual approach. Now, obviously, there's much more sophisticated and automated ways to do that through a tool like ClientSuccess. The most important thing when it comes to forecasting is that it goes bottoms up every deal, and that you're getting these individuals onto that call in a rhythm of taking ownership of the deals that they own. I'd be curious if you want to drop it in the chat, like, what are the tools that you use to forecast today? There's a lot of them out there. A lot of the ClientSuccess tools do a great job, but I'm curious to just see what you're using today. And by the way, if you want just as a quick and dirty spreadsheet, just connect with me on LinkedIn. If you would, drop me a DM, and I'd be happy to share that with you. Okay, and Dave, I'm not watching the questions right now. I think we'll get to those here toward the end. But if there's anything in there that you think is relevant, want to pop in, just let me know.
Yeah, there's a few that we'll get to at the end.
Okay, great. All right, step 4. Now you've built the muscle, you have clear ownership, right? Now what you need to do is go get visibility. And this happens at the executive level and at the board level if you're a publicly traded company. But getting that kind of buy-in, what this is going to do is it's going to raise the visibility within the organization. Now, sometimes, people are going to be like, I don't know if I want the scrutiny. I don't know if I want the questions if I don't know the answers yet. That's okay, but here's what I've found. The better the visibility, the more help across the organization you're going to get. And as we mentioned earlier, the reality is that this is a team sport. Customers leave for a variety of reasons. Some of them are directly in the realm of responsibility for a CSM, and many of them are not. It might be due to product. It might be due to sales expectations or onboarding experience. There's so many different ways that are reasons that a customer might churn. But by raising that to the right visibility, you'll get collaboration across the organization. And that, if anything else that we've talked about, that to me is critical. That means that the organization is bought into and believes in a customer culture, right? Retaining customers matter. So don't wait to be asked for a roll up or a report. If you haven't been asked for this yet, go and create one. Create a sample report and share that with your manager or your leader and say, hey, this is what I plan to share with you every week or every other week. Would you make any changes to this before I start doing that? That kind of proactivity and putting the data in front of the leaders is going to bring a greater spotlight onto churn and helping you reduce it.
Yeah, Jared, I'll add one point here. I agree. I think that for customer success teams, doing this can be one of the best things that can raise your profile in an organization, build your credibility, and just build this muscle is like being proactive to the executive team, coming up with these methodologies and being confident in your forecast, and communicate early and often about it. The worst things that executives that they hate is being blindsided by things. So create the established protocol and methodology, but then also educate them if things change that are significant or material in between those meetings.
Dave, that's so important because this is a step about building trust. And I'll just tell you, if the leader is asking you for it, some trust has already been eroded, whether they say that or not, right? They're having to ask you for why that customer churned or why the churn number is what it is, or they're wondering, like, I don't even know what it is. So when you proactively put it in front of them, you're building trust. And so I would say take action soon. Like you said, communicate early and often. Great. Okay, the last step. Yeah, this is the one that I say is probably the most overlooked. But again, if you go into your organization and you look at compensation, this will tell you who owns renewals in your organization. And what I often see is either that nobody is being compensated for renewals, it's being peanut butter spread across 5 different teams, right? So what I recommend is creating a compensation structure that aligns with step number 1. So for example, if the CSM owns it, step 5 should be CSM is compensated for it. So when I look at different comp plans should reflect the ownership. They should be simple. Personally, I like a single metric. 100% of your variable comp is based on GRR, gross revenue retention. No ambiguity as to who owns that and what I want that team focused on, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the CSM is not going to do other important things. And you can see other comp examples, like they may help in an upsell. And I've been in organizations where the CSM actually gets a commission for any upsell within their base. Getting a multi-year renewal is key. Acts of advocacy, whether it's a case study or an online review or, any of those kinds of things that help us promote the business. These are things that I think can be compensated for as well. So I put those in there as ideas, but I would recommend getting very clear on what the target is. You can see on the right, if your target's 93%, and that means you get 100% of your variable comp, make something that's very juicy going up, is at least what I recommend. So
I'm going to jump in here too, Jared. I am 100% in agreement with you. I think comp plans are they're very overlooked, and they're a secret sauce of driving the right collaboration, the right motivation, not only with the team that owns the renewals, but also their colleagues in other departments. And so make sure that you have the right comp plan that drives collaboration, clarity, and recognition.
yeah. I was actually talking to a client yesterday, actually, and they were saying, look, I just want to build better collaboration between my CSM, who owned renewal, and my account executive, who owned the upsell. And today in their organization, there was a bit of this going on.
Yeah.
The AE
Yep.
was not wanting to bring the CSM in, right? The CSM didn't want to bring the AE in for upsell because they kind of felt like, well, I'm here doing all the work. And then all of a sudden you swoop in, you get the upsell and the commission. And so what I've seen is a very collaborative way of building comp plan for both of those is compensating for both of those. So if they own renewal over here in CSMs and they own expansion over here, right? Those are the primary metrics that drive net revenue retention. So you want clarity and ownership there. But how do you get them to work together? Well, what if the CSM got 1 or 2% commission on anything that was sold in their base? And what if the AE actually got an increased commission if their retention rate within their book of business was above X? Now they're thinking, oh, wow, how can I help the CSM drive better retention? And the CSM's thinking, how can I bring the AE in to help sell more? Now you get this more collaborative function across those organizations.
Yep, agreed.
Awesome. Okay, well, listen, so we've covered a lot of content here. 5 steps. If you go do these, create clear ownership, build that muscle, track every single deal, get visibility at the executive level, and then align your compensation. I promise you, what you're going to see, more predictable forecasting, something you can actually trust, more trust from your organization leaders, more alignment across all the teams, and ultimately you're going to deliver the results to the business that's needed. So I'm going to pause there, and we're going to open it up to some questions.
Yeah.
This has been super fun, and just appreciate it. So Dave, how do you want to handle the questions?
Yeah, we've got several questions, and I'll go through them. We'll have you weigh in. I may share a few thoughts as well. The first ones came from an anonymous attendee who said, "I think ownership applies to the customer side as well. We talked about ownership within the vendor, if you will. But what about having ownership, making sure there's clear ownership of who the owner is on the customer who's renewing? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the importance of that?
Yeah.
For example, who owns a budget on their side? Who owns the renewal? Those types of things."
Smart question. Yeah. This really comes down to kind of a mutual action plan is what they use in sales. So, whether it's 6 months or 12 months ahead of the renewal that you begin your renewal motion, whoever's driving that renewal motion should be getting on a call with the customer and defining the mutual action plan. And in that, you would ask questions like, how do you approve budget? Who's going to actually sign this? How much time do you need in order to run this through your legal process? And when you get all those questions answered way up front and put it into an action plan, then you and the customer are sharing ownership to the renewal date. Yep, very smart question.
Great. Another one from Diana asking about how do you apply a percentage in your forecast for the different risk categories, such as likely, uncertain, or unlikely? So do you, in your methodology, do you recommend adding a certain percentage of those dollars coming in, or a percentage of likeliness to renew?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is important that you take the total dollars up for renewal and that you allocate that based on the category that it's in. So, and we could go back to that slide here, but basically on this side, if I had a deal, so here in week 3, 889,000 is up for renewal, right? The stuff that's already closed won, done. Anything down here, I use these categories of downgrade confirmed and churn confirmed. Those mean those dollars have already walked out the door. There's nothing more you can do about them. So don't spend more time or effort. The ones are in these categories of, do you think it's going to downgrade? And if so, by how much? Do you think it's going to churn, which would mean all the dollars are at risk? And is it at high risk? And if it's in high risk, how much do you attribute? This requires a bit of a data exercise, and it varies based on business. But basically, if you could go look at the last 12 months of your organization and say, okay, I'm doing this forecasting. What percent of dollars, when put into high risk, ultimately result in churn? And what percent ultimately result in renewal? And then you'll get a percentage based. I see anywhere from like 30 to 60% of dollars put into high risk end up churning. Now you can back that into your forecast itself to say, okay, anything on week 3, if I have, fortunately here $0, right? But if I had $100,000 in high risk, I know a certain percentage of that is likely going to churn and certain percent's likely going to renew.
Yeah, that's great. Another one from Michael. What mechanism are you using to verify the accuracy of your forecast? You kind of touched on it there, but do
Yeah.
you have anything else to add there? Yeah.
Yeah, the accuracy of the forecast really begins at looking at the beginning of a period compared to the end of the period. So if you're on a quarterly basis, right, let's say that you're forecasting one quarter in advance. What I would do is I would snap the line, if you will, 2 weeks into the quarter. And you're going to say, okay, this is what the team is forecasting for this quarter. Great. Now we go and run the business. All right. At the very end of the quarter, we're going to look back and say, what did we actually deliver? And how does that compare to what it was in week 2? And then you get that percentage. That's your accuracy. You run that quarter by quarter by quarter, and you very quickly see how good you are at an organization at predicting your churn. So the same method that they use in sales for, sales forecast accuracy.
There you go. Okay, Bill is asking about bottoms up forecasting when you've got a long tail of thousands up for renewal. Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Yeah, I knew that this question was going to come in. A lot of my talk track is, you get on a call with the customer, right? You forecast every deal bottoms up. And I realize at scale, especially for long tail customers, that can become a challenge. So what can you do about it? Look, forecasting accuracy is based on signals. Some of those signals, in a, torso to head are ones that you may have heard when you're on a call with a customer. But even in a long tail, there's still signals. Are they logging into your product? Are they paying their bill? Right? Are they engaging with the marketing content or the how-to articles that I'm sending to them? So there's still signals, and those would then feed into either a composite health score that your renewal team, when it comes up time for renewal, they're going to look at those signals and say, okay, based on what we've seen, this is how we're going to call it. You may be wildly inaccurate at first, and that's okay. Call it and measure how accurate you were based on the signals that you saw. And when over time, you start to adjust those signals if they're inaccurate, and you find the ones that will predict churn.
That's great. We got a few more. One question is how would you consider a comp plan where the big problem is the first year renewal? So after the first year, a big drop off, and then it gets significantly higher in subsequent years. We know that like typically if you can keep somebody for past that first year renewal, your likelihood of keeping them longer term is that much higher. Well, how would you consider thinking about a comp plan in that situation where you really want to ensure that that first year renewal happens? Any ideas there?
Yeah, a few thoughts. In my experience, like multi-year renewals in a contract move the needle for the number that we call gross revenue retention. And I think Christy, you had, I know you're on the call here, had posted recently about, nobody wants to be locked into a contract, and that's why they stay. They actually want to stay because the product is great and it's meeting their needs and the service is good. But I would say that having a multi-year contract still makes a material difference in terms of the renewal rate. So I think it's both. You gotta have an awesome product and multi-year. That's upfront. Okay. So if your organization is not doing multi-year, call to action, go and work with the legal team or whoever needs to build into the process multi-year contracts up front. For those that, if first year renewal is essential in order to determine longer term renewal, then you might compensate a little bit differently. And I could help look at comp plans with you if that's of interest to you. But basically, I would say, okay, what percent of the dollars are going to come up for renewal in the first year? And maybe you set a higher bar for renewal rate and a higher payout if they achieve that in that first year, and then it ladders down after that. Uh,
Yeah, I agree.
Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
Just a couple thoughts. I agree with you. Like, I think you want your comp plan to drive the desired outcomes and the desired behavior. And so I would consider that. I would maybe do a higher per payout for year one. I also heard, and I think it was HubSpot in the early years, who had a very low year one renewal rate. And I think what they did was they like held some, even worked with the AEs to hold some of their commissions back, or gave them a little bit of a bump after 6 months of success or a year renewal, to try to make sure that what I call success storm, where they all stayed close to the customers and made sure those customers were successful. So those are a couple ideas that you could consider.
Love that idea, Dave. You know,
Yeah.
hold the sellers accountable as well for that
Yeah.
first year renewal, because that's a real, if they leave after the first year, you know, unless you've got something horribly going wrong in your onboarding or in your process, it's likely due to not product fit.
Yeah, it's selling customers that are not good fit, and then your metrics as a business start having challenges with your CAC and your payback and those types of things. So, all right, next question. Somebody had noticed in your example that you had, looks like there was zero payout if a CSM doesn't achieve 89% retention on a goal of 93. She says, or he or she says, this is much more aggressive than I'm used to seeing. I worry that could be demotivating. Have you seen this work in practice? So just a question of like, is this an example, or is this an actual comp plan strategy that you'd recommend? I think she was noting that the 0% kind of goes off a cliff right there.
Yeah, yeah. This is just a sample, and it really is based on the business. You know, if you've got 3 customers, you know, and one of those churns, well, you're below 89%, and that could be pretty scary. You know, in an organization that's a little bit more predictable in terms of their churn, and the longer you do this, the more that band is going to get dialed in, that you know it's very unlikely for somebody to drop below a certain threshold, you know, unless that individual is underperforming, because you have enough data to support that. So my recommendation would be, if you don't have a comp plan like this in place yet, and you're not yet confident on your data, those bands should be a little bit wider, and the floor should probably be a little bit lower. And as you get more data and more predictability, it's going to get nice and tight.
There we go. Okay, last question here. If anybody has any final, we still have some time. So Tara asks, how do you forecast contract renewals and mid-year anniversaries where customers are in a multi-year contract with a cancellation clause midterm? In our company, we call that a 1-year renewal. A 2-year contract with a 1-year opt-out. I kind of call it as it is to my sales team and say, you know what, that's actually a 1-year deal. But we do have those, and we see that. But do you forecast, what do you suggest? Do you forecast those mid-year anniversaries if they have an opt-out?
Forecast everything is my answer. Everything bottoms up. Dave, I agree with you that if you've got a term for convenience, if you have an opt-out or something that is mid-contract term, call it what it is. And personally, you know, I'd go back to the account executive team and say, look, if you're getting compensated for multi-year, it doesn't count if there's there's an opt-out halfway through or a term for convenience. So, you know, that's just that. Why is that? It's not that you're trying to be mean to the account executives or not paying, but it's about risk. And what you're trying to do is eliminate risk from the organization. Terms like that add risk.
That's great. That's great. Well, it looks like that's it for today. All the questions answered. Jared, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Excellent best practices. I think those 5 rules, if everybody will implement those 5 rules, they'll find much more success in their forecasting. But tell us a little bit more. Anything else that you've got, Jared? Where can everybody reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, if it's all right, Dave, we can send out some additional materials. Basically, what I do is I've identified 10 strategies that are most common across organizations. We've touched on one of them today around renewal forecasting, but anything from like customer voice to onboarding to working with your product teams to, on and on. There's things that really move the needle. And I work with companies to help put these strategies in place. You can find me on LinkedIn, jared@crushchurn.com. I'll put my phone number out there as well if you want to reach me that way. But it's honestly been a real pleasure to be here, and happy to help where I can.
All right, Jared. Thanks for being here. Grateful for the friendship and the great thought leadership that you shared today. And we want to just say thank you to everybody who's joined us on behalf of the team at Client Success. Thanks for joining us. We usually do these every Tuesday. We'll be announcing our next one in the next couple of days for next Tuesday. But join Christy and or I here on these webinars every Tuesday. But on behalf of the Client Success teams, thanks for joining us. Reach out to us if we can help you at all, and be sure to have a demo of our product to help your team drive success throughout your business. Thanks, and have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.